For a misanthropic misfit like myself, it was a nightmare. Let's just say I do my best behind my computer, talking to people over a microphone, not actually having to make eye contact. I tried getting out of it, but my parents weren't having it. They thought the fresh air would do me some good. Let me assure you, it did not. The first 2 days went mostly as expected. Me at the very back of the group, one of the chaperones occasionally trying to make awkward small talk and half-hearted encouragements, and my classmates largely ignoring me. Surprisingly, the hiking was actually almost enjoyable. Misshapen warped birch trees were scattered over the yellowing grass and the browning heather. Mountains rose on both sides, looming ominously. I thought I could even have liked it. Like this, I somehow made it to day 3. By the end of it, I was lagging pretty far behind. The amount of physical activity was far higher than what I was used to, and it was getting to me. When I finally spotted the last cabin, the sun had set, and we were hiking in that gloomy blue half-light that lingers after the northern sun sets. It looked huge, imposing in the distance. The cabin, actually, was a set of cabins, a campground, and a rather large main house. I bet it could house 100 people if it had to. It looked out of place, there in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the mountains. By the time we got there, the rest of the group had eaten dinner, and were hanging out in the common area. I got to eat with a teacher who had to hang back and make sure the rear, i.e. me, made it all the way, which is how I learned that the place was closed for the season, so only our group of 30 or so teenagers were sleeping there. Our teacher knew the people who ran it. He organized it so they would just have to drive in food for us, and leave us to use it. So there we were, about 30 kids, 2 teachers, and the vast empty space of the mountains and valleys. I didn't want to interact with the others. I wanted to be asleep, or believably pretending to be asleep, when the rest of the guys I would have to share my room with went to bed. I was exhausted, a little embarrassed by how slow I had been, and as it turned out, completely without a cell signal. So staying up had nothing for me. I headed straight to my room and promptly went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up in a panic. The room was pitch black. Usually our rooms weren't that dark. These places never managed to keep the light out completely. Light would seep through from the hallway. The moon would shine through a gap in the curtains. Some red light would be blinking on some appliance. Something would pierce the darkness, but this one was just pitch black. I was sure someone was in the room, standing above my head, looking at me. You know, one of those silly things you think of. My breath caught in my throat. My heart beat like crazy. I laid there for what felt like hours. Nothing happened. Of course nothing happened. I tried to talk myself down in my head. I was being silly. I was safe. There was just miles and miles of empty woods and hills around here where anything could be hiding. Could have followed us. Could have seen us. Defenseless. Alone. No, you're safe. Don't be silly. I wanted to turn on the light, but I didn't want to piss the others off. But I really wanted to turn on a light. As a sort of compromise, I decided to go to the bathroom. That meant I could turn on the light in the hallway and sneak a peek back into the room. I sat up, swung my legs off the side of the bed, and felt around for my shoes. I put them on and snuck out the door. I flicked the switch in the hallway. I glanced back into the room. Nothing there. Of course. I just had to make sure. I walked down the hallway until I found the bathroom. The air was freezing. Someone had left the window open. Ha, I thought. Someone took a shit. Nice of them to air it out, I guess. But when you leave a window open in Norway, in the mountains, in the middle of October, at night, it gets really, really cold. I did my business and walked over to the window to close it. Not that I cared about those other idiots. They could freeze in the morning for all I cared. But still, you just don't leave windows open when it's cold out. As I went to close it, I looked out the window and caught a glimpse of the night sky. It was covered in stars, and there, right above the nearest mountain, a vague, green blob was materializing. Northern Lights? This far south? My heart almost stopped. I had never seen the northern lights in my life. We hardly ever got them as far south as where I live. So I tiptoed back into my room, grabbed my phone and my coat, and headed out into the fall night. For a second I debated whether I should wake the guys. They would probably love seeing the northern lights as much as I would. Screw them, I decided. Not like they would wake me up if the tables were turned. Frost covered the ground, glittering in the strange green light from the sky. It was the northern lights. Not very strong, not very defined, but undeniable still. Nothing else turns the sky green like that. I stood there, staring at the sky, freezing for hours. The fear from earlier had completely gone. I stood there, so small, so insignificant, under the stars and the strange green light that flickered across the skies, completely mesmerized. Finally, my whole body started shaking, and I realized that I was freezing, and I had to go back inside, no matter how beautiful this all was. My eyes had adjusted to the dim light from outside, so I snuck down the corridor without turning the lights on. I knew the bright light would blind me, and I didn't want to burn out the beautiful memories of the aura with the grim fluorescent light that lined the hallway. I used the light on my phone to identify my room. I snuck back into my warm bed and promptly fell asleep. I woke up with a start and groped around on the floor for my phone. 10:30, it read. Shit, I overslept. Breakfast was at 7:30, and we were supposed to be hiking by 9. Shit. I jumped out of bed, almost hitting my head on the bunk above me. Why hadn't anybody woken me up? The blinds are still down. The room was dark. I opened the door. The corridor outside was dark. The whole place was quiet. I flicked the light switch. The power was out. A chill ran down my spine. Was something wrong? The room was dead quiet. No snoring from the boys. I was clearly the only one there. Questions trudged through my sludgy morning brain. Was this some sort of prank? Leave the weirdo behind? But the teachers wouldn't have gone along with it, would they? The slow burn of worry started in my gut. I was all alone in the wilderness. All that empty space. Wait, no. There was a road. I had my phone. Someone could come get me. I wasn't lost. I was just forgotten. Actually, they probably hadn't left me behind. Maybe there was a storm or something. Maybe the hike was canceled. I yawned. Even if they had left me, it just meant that someone would have to come get me, and I didn't have to hike the last leg of the trip. Fine. I grabbed my jacket, put my feet into my shoes, and set off to find some people or some food, preferably both. I was still half asleep as I shuffled into the dining room. I registered that it was also empty. Breakfast was clearly over, as the teachers had promised it would be. I was hungry though. I crossed my fingers that I would find some leftovers in the kitchen. I pushed open the door with the staff only sign, shuffled across the linoleum floor, opened the fridge, and to my delight, I found it still full, the pantry as well. I made myself a sandwich, and my mood improved considerably. I might have been left behind, but I was left behind with food. It wasn't all bad. I munched on my sandwich while considering what to do next. I went to make a second one when it occurred to me that there was a lot of food there. Like, too much. This is all the food we would have needed for the breakfast. Had the others eaten? The uneasy feeling came back. Why would they have left without eating? It made no sense, unless something had happened. Again I thought of the vast wilderness of the lonely road, of something that could be hiding in the mountains, in the house, in the rooms. God, no. There were so many rooms, empty cabins, empty spaces, closed doors. Closed doors, with God knows what behind them. I should have checked the rooms. Why hadn't that been my first move? Because I didn't want to. The thought of opening all those doors, finding them all empty, or worse yet, not finding them empty, The fear started growing within me, and I knew I had to do something, and had to do it before I was totally paralyzed by panic. So I gathered all my courage, got to my feet, and left the kitchen. The sound of my steps rang out through the cavernous dining room. They seemed so much louder now. My heart was pounding by the time I tiptoed down the dark hallway. The only window was at the far end, and the sky was covered in clouds. It didn't do very much to lighten up the corridor, and it did nothing for my fear. I found myself stopping outside my room. I already knew it was empty, but I still wanted to check there first. Maybe because I was so sure that it was empty. It felt like a safe place to start. Or maybe because, deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. The blinds still kept the room completely dark, so I couldn't see anything there. I crossed the room with 2 long strides. What little daylight seeped through the gray sky would still be a welcome friend in the quiet gloom. I tugged at the string. I jumped a little, as the sound of the curtain rolling up rang sharply throughout the empty room. I turned around. To my great surprise, Peter, one of the guys, was lying in the bed opposite of mine, clearly fast asleep. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone. "Peter?" I croaked. I cleared my throat. "Peter," I repeated a bit louder. No response. It occurred to me that it made no sense that he was still here. There were so many reasons why he should not be asleep in this bed right now. I took a step toward him. "Peter," I whispered, heart beating in my throat. I reached out, grabbed his arm under the covers, and shook. No response. He seemed totally dead. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. Dead? No. No way. Absolutely not. I forced my shaking hand towards his neck to feel for a pulse. My fingertips made contact with his icy skin, and I knew instantly that he was dead. Nobody alive could be that cold. He had been dead for hours. My knees gave out under me, and I crashed to the floor. Peter was dead. Just lying there, next to me. He had been dead this whole time. I had walked in and out of the room. I had eaten breakfast. He had been dead the whole time. Oh God. I vomited on the floor. Somehow I made it to my feet. I had to check the other bunk. I had to find help. I couldn't be here all alone with a corpse. The other bunks weren't empty either. The 2 other boys in the room were as cold and dead as Peter. I only remember bits and pieces from the next few hours. I recall running wildly down the hallway, tearing open doors. Not all of them were unlocked, but the ones that were revealed more dead bodies. Everyone, all the rooms. They were all stone cold dead, and I was all alone. I think I screamed a lot, because my throat hurt like hell when I finally entered a short sort of catatonic trance that could be construed as calming down. It could have just been from the vomiting though. I'm fairly sure it happened multiple times. I was lying in the fetal position at the end of the hallway, outside my dead teacher's room. I was shaking convulsively. I had no thought for my own safety. I had given no consideration to why they were dead. All I knew was that I was alone, in a house full of dead people. I don't know what part of me kicked into gear, but it finally occurred to me that I should call the police. That's what you're supposed to do when people are dead. You call the police, and they take care of it. Except I had no reception. The part of my brain that was still running some sort of script figured that I should go for a high point. There was a hill behind the hostel. I grabbed my phone and started hiking. It took me exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes to get a single bar on my phone. At this point, my battery was down to 4%, and my panic was back to about 97%. I typed 112 with shaking fingers, and I prayed as the phone rang. "No battery! Send people to the..." I gave out my location. "They're dead! They're all dead! Please! Please! Please!" I managed to yell to the operator before the phone died. I shook the phone helplessly. I turned it back on. The light flickered across the screen. That stupid opening graphic. I frantically typed in my PIN, pressed the phone icon, typed 122, and watched my phone turn itself off. I stared disbelievingly at the useless piece of technology in my hand. My only hope was that they had gotten the message. Had I said the name clearly? Would they believe me? Did it sound like a prank call? I stood there until the sweat on my back chilled me to the bone, and I realized that I needed to get moving. I wasn't going back into that tomb. No way. I decided that I would go back down and follow the road. And only then did it occur to me to wonder why they were dead. You would think that that would be the first thing on my mind, but it wasn't. Only at that moment, when I was freezing cold, my last avenue of communication gone, it occurred to me, what the hell happened? Had something done this? Should I be dead too? Should I hide? I went over the morning in my head. If someone wanted me dead, I would have been. If someone had done this, they were long gone. Unless they left me alive on purpose. Unless they left me alone to watch me panic. To watch me run around in panic. Someone who killed 30 people would enjoy that, wouldn't they? The chase. The game. No, I told myself firmly. That's not it. I ran through a list of plausible explanations in my head. There was no blood. No signs of trauma. They looked like they had been poisoned, really. We all ate the same thing, though. Maybe it was something in the air. Carbon monoxide poisoning? That could be it. No, really, that made total sense. You hear about these horror stories, right? Busted heater, whole family dead. Why not a whole school class? Made much more sense than some crazed serial killer. Contrary to what all the Scandinavian Norcrime novels would have you believe, Scandinavia does not have a lot of serial killers, and carbon monoxide poisoning happens. And I had spent hours outside last night, while the others were suffocating, enjoying the beautiful northern lights. Somewhat calmed by the rational explanation, I turned to head back down. I made a deal with myself that I had to go back past the cabin, but that I didn't have to head back inside. Just follow the road until you see the police or some sort of civilization. I turned back around, taking in the view from up the hill for the first time. I got a look at the hostel and the surrounding fields, and my perfectly rational explanation shattered, along with my fragile sliver of calmness. Down there, in the fields surrounding the cabins, I could clearly see a perfect circle of dead, brown grass. The main building, where we had slept, was at the very edge of it, which meant that we had been standing last night just outside of the circle. And inside the circle, everything was dead. I don't think carbon monoxide could do that. The police were there when I came back. I honestly don't remember the details of what happened next. I doubt they would be interesting anyway. 2 things you should know. They said it was carbon monoxide poisoning, and that I somehow escaped because I was outside. Nobody said anything about the circle. When I asked, I was told to drop it, that grass sometimes dies. And also, the northern lights had not been visible that far south that night. In fact, they hadn't been visible anywhere on mainland Norway for weeks. So, what the hell happened that night?
There's always a reason to be afraid.
Last night, my sleep was cut short by a phone call that came from an unknown number. The ringing woke me up. I scrambled to the phone and looked at the time. It was 3:05 a.m. I looked down at the blindingly bright light of my smartphone. The call was coming from an unknown number. My decision-making wasn't the best in that moment, and I decided to pick up. Hello? Who is this?
Hi, mister. My name is Stacy.
This caught me off guard. The person was a small child, judging by the voice. I sobered up in a second and perked up my ears. Hi, Stacy. Honey, are you okay? Why are you calling me?
He said I can't talk to anyone, or I would be punished.
Her voice sounded shaken up and she was crying. Who told you that? Your father?
No, the man that took me to his house and said it was my new home, and that my parents gave me to him. I haven't seen my dad in a year. He never lets me go out of the basement. He gave me this phone today and said I can play games, but I opened the contacts and your number was the only one there.
It sounded like she had been kidnapped, but I tried to remain calm, trying my best not to frighten her even more. I took out my backup phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up in a second, and I told her just to listen. I held the phone up close and continued to talk to Stacy. Can you tell me your last name and your parents' number?
My last name is Martin. I don't really remember my dad's number, but I do know 3 numbers. 203.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. Just stay on the line with me, okay? I hope the dispatcher was paying close attention and collecting the information, searching the database for a missing child by that name. Stacy's voice suddenly came through again, even more scared than before.
He's coming now. I can hear him.
A loud bang came from the room and Stacy started screaming, and on top of all that, I heard this deep voice shouting,
You little bitch.
There was a commotion, and then silence. Officers visited my home the following morning and took my statement. They had identified Stacy's parents, and it turns out that she had been missing for a year. After being abducted from her bedroom in the middle of the night, I waited up for the next several nights, praying that she would call me again. But she never did. The one thing that especially worries me is why the abductor had my number, and why I was his only contact. I answered a scam phone call the other day. You know, one of those pretend to be something legitimate like the IRS? I kept a landline as a decoy. I only give my cell phone number to people that I really trust, so that's the one that telemarketers and robocalls usually go for. I had been cleaning up my apartment when my phone rang. And when the caller ID showed an obviously spoofed number, I took a break from my labors to answer it. I figured fucking with a scammer would be a nice distraction from scrubbing the bathroom. The guy, in a refreshing twist, did not sound like an Indian trying to have an American accent, so it was probably genuine.
Hello, this is the IRS. Our records show a discrepancy with your account and you need to settle that payment as soon as possible. I'll need a working credit card number and your social security number.
I could practically see the script this guy was reading from. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that first part. I was grinning in anticipation of the obstacle course I was going to put this guy through. He sighed, like I was being difficult. He hadn't even begun to see me get difficult.
Our records show...
No, your name. I didn't catch it.
Sir, my name is not important. You need to make good on your debt. I have 911 ready on the other line, and you will be arrested for failure to pay.
My, the little fucker was forward, wasn't he? I ramped up my act. Oh my god, whatever could be wrong with my tax return? I've only been blackmailing my employees for sex. That's not considered embezzlement, is it?
Sir, you will be treated as a hostile party during arrest if you do not cooperate.
Oh, please don't take my vast fortune. It's all tied up in gift cards. I wailed. The guy on the phone let out another annoyed sigh.
Sir, you can't treat the IRS like a joke. What year do you think this is?
2017, the year of our Lord, I said as dramatically as I could. His end of the line went quiet.
That's not funny.
Oh what, did your OS forget to roll over during Y2K? Cracked software can do that sometimes. Do me a favor and delete your Windows 32 file, and that should fix things right up.
Sir, It's 1985. I will call the police if you do not cooperate.
That made me pause. What the fuck kind of game was this guy playing? I decided to continue. I hate to break this to you, buddy, but it just turned 2017, about a month ago. I have the celebrity deaths counter to prove it. His end of the line went quiet.
Sir, I must inform you that attempting to deceive a representative of the IRS constitutes a felony charge.
So you're in 1985. I sprawled sideways across my easy chair. Can you find Reagan for me and slap him? The caller was quiet for a few seconds.
Prove to me it's 2017.
Look, I don't have to prove shit to you. You're trying to scam me out of my goddamn money. I could hear him breathing erratically on the other side.
They promised me I could go right back if I worked, they said. I have a 10-year loan for God's sake.
Where are you calling from? A North Korean prison?
No, hell.
He said it so casually, like he was saying, I'm at the office, or I'm just down the block. So you're in hell, I repeated back to him.
I got tricked into coming here a while ago. They said if I worked for them for a bit, they'd send me right back.
He started mumbling away from the receiver. I could catch a few words here and there, mostly profanities. So what, you're making phone calls in the middle of the inferno?
Actually, it's a lot like an office. Everything's gray, even the computer screen. I have to squint really bad to read anything. At first I was glad, but, I kind of feel like Hellfire would be an improvement at this point. I never see anyone or talk to anyone. I just get the numbers and dial out.
He was babbling, and just sounded glad to hold a conversation with someone. It felt genuine. But this was rapidly becoming very creepy. So hell wants you to scam people out of their money? I got up and started pacing. Did Satan declare bankruptcy?
Nope, it's to make them desperate. People with no money tend to do things that get them into hell, like the guy before me. Someone stiffed him on his GI Bill. I had to agree to fulfill his remaining time. I said yes, and well, here I am.
The amount of detail was unnerving. He didn't stop or stumble through the whole speech.
It's not too bad. I mean, I don't get a whole lot of love from the other end of the phone, but everything's just so gray, I don't know how long I've been here, but the boredom just makes everything feel longer. I haven't eaten or gone to the bathroom since I got here. Haven't needed to. That's what made me think it hadn't been that long, but now that you mention it...
I was out of witty retorts at this point. What the fuck was this guy's deal? Most scammers would just hang up the second they had been found out. Why is he trying to sell me this story?
They told me it wouldn't be that long. Time would fly by, they said. I'd go right back. They wouldn't lie about that, would they?
Yeah, hell is renowned for being truthful.
But I haven't even done anything. They can't keep me here. I'm doing them a favor by working here. They'll owe me.
Yeah? Well, it doesn't sound like it. The guy just rambled on like he hadn't even heard me.
God, I should have gotten it in writing. I don't know how much time I have left on my contract. Unless... You could take over my remaining time, couldn't you? You've got nothing going on. You're answering the phone in the middle of a Saturday. You could help me out.
I slammed the phone down so fast, you could swear my arm was spring-loaded. Then I pulled out the cord. I'm probably going to disconnect my landline. Sure, it means I'll have to be much more careful with my personal number, but at least you can install blocking apps on cell phones. I don't know what's more disturbing. The fact that the guy would inflate his lie to such an extreme, or the possibility that it wasn't a lie. Two years ago, my dad passed away from a stroke. The final image of him burned into my mind is his slumped body in front of his office computer, head tilted back, lips blue, skin bloated and purpling, dead. No one ever went into specifics on who found him. I didn't really care. When someone close to you dies, there's this period of time where life suddenly stops and begins spinning out of control all at once. As soon as the news broke, There was a sea of phone calls, text messages, and emails. Most of them went unanswered as I tended to my dad's personal matters. My mother was incapacitated. She sat, eyes fixed, staring at the wall most days. The doctors prescribed her multiple antidepressants and tranquilizers to help her sleep and stay calm. But when you hit that level of depression and anguish, nothing really helps. The loss destroyed her. She never recovered. As I began collecting some of my father's belongings from his office, I got handed a box that contained his cell phone. While handling my own grief, I sat in the parking lot of his work and scrolled through some of the unanswered voicemails he had never been able to receive. Most of them were from my mother. She would hear his voice on the recording. Other times she would have a conversation. There were unopened messages, mostly from me the day he died. I held the phone tightly in my hand, sobbing, struggling to breathe through my tears. His background screen was from Christmas the year before. Him, my mother, and I were wearing the tackiest Christmas sweaters, and we were all laughing. While I had my moment, my dad's phone began to ring. The number came through listed as unknown. I paused for a moment, but I decided to answer in the event that it was something regarding a bill collector. Hello? There was a muffled static on the other end. I paused, thinking that I had lost service. Right before I was going to end the call, a voice finally came through. Hey. Hi? I cautiously asked. It's okay. I'm here now. The words came through crisp and clear, but I couldn't shake this unnerving feeling that creeped up on me. Who is this? I looked at the phone screen again to assure myself that it was an unknown number. I don't know if I know you, I'm sorry. You know me, or you've at least heard of me. My heartbeat thudded hard against my chest. I'm sorry. What? I shook my head, confused and annoyed. Just know everything is going to be okay. Who is this? I repeated, my own voice strengthening. I know all about your father. Who are you? I tried to keep myself calm, but my temper flared. It felt like a prank, and I was losing my patience. Doesn't matter who I am? Yes, I spat angrily, nervously looking through my windshield to make sure that no one was watching me. My paranoia was gripping at me from all sides. The words coming through the phone felt invasive, like they were ringing in my head. I am known by many names, most commonly the devil, Satan, Lucifer, the Prince of Darkness. I stopped. Everything stopped. My jaw flopped open. Silence came from the other end, and I expected it to then be revealed as a cruel joke. Angry tears sprang into my eyes. Are you still there? Why would you do this? How could you do this to someone? This isn't funny. If you call again, I'm calling the cops. I was about to hang up, but something stopped me. I had a feeling deep in my bones, at my core. I couldn't deny that I was curious to know more about this person. I'm telling you the truth. I know that you're mourning, but it's important that we speak. Why? I want to tell you everything. What do you mean? Your father and I go way back. I've known him since he was a boy. He was nice. He helped me when I needed him the most. We were good friends. My heart was strumming against my ribs at this point. My hair was stuck to my forehead in a thick sweat. The inside of my car suddenly felt like an inferno. I dared not open the window though, because I was afraid someone would hear this bizarre conversation. Why would my father be friends with the devil? Why would the devil be friends with a human? I stiffened in my seat. He was a good man, and the devil is supposed to be mean and awful, right? The absurdity of what I was saying made me want to laugh. Why do you seem so nice? I'm no angel. I shook my head in disbelief. And neither was your father. The voice's tone shifted immediately, and I felt a chill. The sweat on my back ran cold and I shivered. What do you mean? Your father helped me. He helped me to survive for years. He was my right-hand man. In return, I gave him whatever he wanted. Jobs, promotions, a wife, children. The air ran thick. I sucked in a quick breath to make sure my lungs still worked, but I couldn't speak. He did things, unspeakable things, all for me. You're sick. You're a sick person. I regained control of my breathing and settled in for an angry tirade. You have no right to call someone and— You are going to lose everything, and when you do, I will call you again in 2 years' time to ask you what I asked your father. What? Your mother will die from a poisoned body. Your child will perish within the womb. Your wife will lay with another man. All lies within the current of destiny. I ended the call and threw my dad's phone across the front seat of my car. I felt lightheaded and dizzy. After a moment, I drove off, and I never spoke of the phone call to anyone. It always stayed with me, though. I never forgot the conversation, no matter how much I tried. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer last year, I still denied it. When my wife had a miscarriage and left me for another man, I denied it. My mother passed away on Christmas Eve. This morning, I awoke to my father's phone ringing from inside the box. It was stored in my closet, under piles of clothes and artifacts, even though the battery is long since dead. It kept ringing. An unknown number is calling, and I think I'm going to answer it.
There's always a reason to be afraid.
The following stories are based on real events and were obtained from interviews conducted by Unit 522 and Tim Sonsky. Some names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. These stories will contain disturbing content. Viewer discretion is advised. This isn't a traditional creepy story where something unexplainable or horrible happened to me, but rather, what almost happened to me. What I almost became. Back in the early 1990s, I was in my late teens, and without question what could be described as a bad seed. My friends and I were just simply horrible people. We would throw rocks at stray cats and passing cars, bully younger kids and steal bicycles to take them on joyrides, where most of the time we would just leave them in the gully in the woods when we got bored with them. My parents tried to discipline me, but it never really stuck, and most of the time, they found it easier just to have me out of the house. I was an appalling kid, really. I cursed at my parents and teachers, talked back to the cops, and never used to feel sorry for anyone unless it was me. One night, my friend and I were smoking cigarettes on his back porch, and when his dad went to bed, my friend darted into the garage and returned with an old-fashioned handgun. I picked it up with both hands and started pointing it every which way, without a care in the world. He told me his dad had bought it a week ago off the street, and when he confirmed that it was loaded, the very first thing that entered my mind was, "Hey, we should go rob someone." I hid the gun in my waistband and walked down the street with my friend to the end of the cul-de-sac where we knew an old woman lived alone. We had no idea what exactly we wanted to rob from her. We just knew that she would be an easy target. We snuck around the back of the house and walked up onto her back porch, and I was able to force the locked door open just by putting my weight against it and jiggling the knob hard back and forth. As soon as the door was open, and the domestic old person smell from inside the house wafted over us, my friend lost his nerve and bolted away. He literally just said, "I changed my mind," and took off running. I walked right into the house without him, determined not just to take something, but I wanted to scare the woman as well. I walked through the kitchen and into the living room, where the old woman was sleeping on the couch. The TV was on, and the volume was turned down. I pointed my gun at her face. But after a moment when she didn't open her eyes, I felt disappointed, and I walked around behind the couch. I held the barrel of the gun less than an inch away from her head, and in that moment, from the back of my mind, I kept hearing a voice whispering to me, "You can kill her. Do it." Having a weapon in my hand gave me an incredible feeling of power. I didn't have any intention of actually hurting the woman, but now that I was here, it seemed like the obvious thing to do. Without pausing to think, my fingers squeezed the trigger, but nothing happened. The safety was on, and the trigger was locked. Suddenly, the weight of what I nearly did hit me like a ton of bricks. I started shaking and immediately lowered the gun. I power walked out of the living room, across the kitchen, into the back door. When I reached it, I paused, turned around, and saw the woman's eyes were open. She was looking right at me. There were tears in her eyes and a look of terror on her face. Her fear immediately made me start tearing up. I ran back home, gave the gun to my parents, and confessed that I had nearly done something really bad. They called the police, and I confessed to having broken into an old woman's house with a gun. I didn't tell them about attempting to pull the trigger. I didn't tell them about my friend or where I got the gun either. I had to spend some time in juvenile hall for breaking and entering. But honestly, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. I'll never forget that night. I was on the path of self-destruction, and I very nearly crossed a line that would have ruined my life forever. It makes me sick, knowing exactly how close I came. I've never touched a gun since, and fortunately I managed to turn my life around. Please use this as a cautionary tale. All it takes is one deceptive thought at the wrong moment, and you could destroy your future. Please, everyone, be smarter than I was. Back in the late 90s, I used to have a serious drug problem. I was living in Las Vegas at the time, and after snorting my entire stash of coke, I would party, pass out, wake up, jack some cars, sell them, spend some money on food, and the rest would go to my dealer, and then I would snort again and repeat the entire process. One night in July, I broke into a panel van without windows. It was parked alone outside of a rat-infested motel. My gut told me that I should check the back before I drove away, but my mind was on my next fix, and I just floored it as soon as I got the engine started. I drove about an hour away into an isolated area of the desert, where I would meet my contact, who would check out the car, pay me in cash, and then drop me off at the nearest street corner. Once I put the van in park, I decided to check out the back. I figured there might be some tools or something back there that I could pawn for more cash. The back of the van was padlocked shut, which should have been my first clue, because when I smashed it open with my crowbar, I heard a high-pitched wailing from inside. I turned on my flashlight, and my stomach dropped. 4 Hispanic children, 2 boys and 2 girls, were tied up and gagged, lying on a handful of filthy cushions. They were all in tears and staring at me in absolute horror. I dropped the crowbar and backed away from the van a few steps. This was bad. Really fucking bad. I didn't know what to do. I had clearly stolen the van from a kidnapper or a human trafficker, and they would be looking to recover it, and likely shoot the asshole who took it from them. I decided not to call my contact. I knew him pretty well, and I was fairly certain that he would either kill the kids and dump their bodies in the desert, or shoot me for fucking this up. I made a snap decision. I climbed in the van and explained to them in both English and what Spanish I knew that I wasn't going to hurt them. I ungagged them and cut the bonds around their wrists, but I left their ankles tied. I couldn't risk them running off. I felt sick to my stomach with heartbroken guilt when I saw the welts around their hands. The stench of urine and sweat was heavy in the air. I climbed back in the driver's seat, drove back out of the desert, and at the first service stop I pulled in and parked. I went inside and bought 4 bottles of water, and as many bags of snacks that I could afford. I carefully opened the back of the van and tossed the bag inside. Then I closed it again and walked across the lot. I made an anonymous phone call to the police from a payphone, and then walked to the next service station, where I had a friend come pick me up. After that night, I had my friend buy me a bus ticket to Texas, where I had an older brother who would let me stay on his couch. I got clean, and I ultimately turned my life around. I got an honest job, and I now have my own family and my own home. I remember being so relieved when I heard on the news that the kids had been found and were returned to their families in Mexico. You never know when life will give you a test like that and a chance to prove your character. I like to think that those kids helped me as much as I helped them. When I was a kid, I lived in an extremely low-income apartment complex in Baltimore with my grandmother. My building was infested with drug dealers and criminals who would kill you if you even looked at them the wrong way. Remember the building in the movie The Raid: Redemption, where every floor was essentially another level of murderous assholes you had to face before reaching the main boss at the top floor? Yeah, that was my life. If my grandmother and I had any other place to go, we would have left. But she was old and frail, and we couldn't exactly just wander the streets. Some of the floors in my building were used for manufacturing drugs, and some were used for distribution. Several times at night we would hear arguing and gunfire beneath us, and the air on the staircase always smelled tainted with the coppery hint of blood, and I tried to imagine all the bodies that had been dragged down the stairs. Sometimes I would be harassed by guys in the hall. They would try to threaten me into transporting drugs for them to another crack house across town, but I always declined. I didn't want to be involved. But I got mugged by a rival gang pretty frequently, and they would likely steal any drugs I was carrying. I got smacked around a bit sometimes, but most of the time, they would leave me be. It's funny how normal that lifestyle became. Seeing guns in the hallways every day didn't even faze me after a while, and it rarely bothered me when I heard people getting beaten right outside our door with baseball bats and tire irons. I would just hold my grandmother real tight until the noise stopped, knowing our door was locked, but I was always aware that it was their indifference that kept us more protected than our deadbolt. One day I returned home from school to find our apartment door wide open. I wandered inside to discover 6 men with assault rifles and shotguns gathered around our kitchen table. One of them grabbed me by the neck and dragged me across the kitchen and into my grandmother's bedroom where she was sobbing on the bed. I ran to her and held her as they closed the door behind us. I'm not sure how long we were in there, but eventually the men in the kitchen went quiet, and we heard an explosion of gunfire from outside the bedroom. The noise was so deafening, we both laid on the ground with pillows pressed to our ears, trying to muffle the roar of the assault rifles. When the silence fell again, it was nearly as deafening as the shots being fired. My ears were ringing as the bedroom door was kicked in, and a man with a black bandana covering his face walked in. He scanned the room, pointed his rifle at my grandmother and I for a few moments, and then walked back out of the room. It was nearly 30 minutes before I summoned the courage to get up and peek out into the kitchen. All 6 of the men who had been gathered around the table before were bullet-ridden and bloody and scattered around like rag dolls across our apartment. I took my grandmother's hand, and we walked out of the apartment and never looked back. The police never came. A neighbor on the ground floor took us in for a night, and the following day, we went to my school together and told my teacher what happened. The school eventually found us a shelter to stay in. The building was eventually raided by police and torn down soon after. We never went back to collect our things, but that didn't bother me. As far as I was concerned, we had barely escaped that apartment with our lives, so there was no way we were ever going back. In 2011, on my 21st birthday, I took it upon myself to go backpacking through the Canadian mountain outdoors all on my own. On my 3rd day out, I reached my destination. It was an old farmhouse sitting on its own in an overgrown field, out in the middle of nowhere. I had discovered it on Google Earth, and was eager to check it out before heading back. In addition to a first aid kit, a compass, and a utility knife, I was carrying a Smith & Wesson Governor revolver, which carried 6 shots. It was the crown jewel of my father's collection, and he had loaned it to me for protection while I was out in the woods alone. He made sure that I had practiced with it several times and knew how to use it before I set off. And now, as I approached the farmhouse, I was pleased that I had taken the time, because I wasn't entirely sure the place was abandoned. Every window on the ground floor was boarded up, and a faded plastic pinwheel spun lazily from where it was stuffed into the dirt by the front door. I walked right up the front steps, and feeling somewhat foolish, I knocked. When no one answered, I walked around the perimeter of the house. There was an ancient rusty fire escape hanging down from one of the upstairs windows, and an old single-door refrigerator lying on its side out amongst the tall grass. When I walked back around to the front door of the house again, I tried the knob. It was rusty, but I managed to turn it with both hands, and the door swung open with a creak. I was just about to walk in when I felt the sensation of eyes on me, and I spun around. Out by the tree line, I saw what appeared to be a man with a long gray beard staring at me. I immediately felt foolish and guilty, and waved at him, my other hand reaching into my belt to rest on the handle of the gun. "Hi there. Is this your place? I'm sorry. I'll leave." For maybe 10 seconds the man just stared at me. Then, without saying anything, he turned and walked back into the trees. That made me nervous. I didn't know how to interpret it, and the last thing I wanted to do was walk back into the woods knowing that he was out there. I decided to enter the house and close the door behind me. I slid a dusty stool in front of the door, so I would hear it tip over if anyone entered. I spent the next hour exploring the house, occasionally glancing out of the windows to see if the man had reappeared. When it finally began getting dark out, I was still nervous and unwilling to leave the house, so I walked up a narrow flight of stairs to the attic, locked the door behind me, set up my gas lantern, and unrolled my sleeping bag. After a light dinner, I updated my journal, turned off the light, and prepared to get some sleep. But after a minute or so, I heard creaking on the stairs, and my eyes shot open. I looked over towards the door, and I heard the faint sound of footsteps climbing the narrow staircase. I threw myself out of the sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight and my gun, and pointed them both towards the door. I called out, "Who's there? If I'm trespassing, I'm sorry. I'll pack up and leave. Just don't try to open the door. I have a gun." The footsteps continued to climb without hesitation. When they were just outside the door, I heard the doorknob rattle. I made my voice sound as furious as I could. "Don't try to get in. I told you I have a gun. Just tell me who you are." There was a moment of hesitation, and then the doorknob began to jiggle harder. "Stop it! I'll fucking shoot." I made myself count to 5, but the doorknob continued to jiggle violently. "Last chance." I made myself count to 5 again, and when the jiggling didn't stop, I fired 2 shots through the door, aiming low, intending to hit the stranger's legs. As soon as the shots rang out, the knob stopped jiggling, and there was silence. There was no sound of anyone falling backwards down the steps or a gasp in pain. There was just silence. I kept the gun up and cautiously walked towards the door. I unlocked it and opened it. I nearly shat myself when I saw there was nothing standing there. There was no blood, no body, no indication that anyone had been standing there. I slammed the door, locked it again, and dragged an ancient rusty armchair in front of the door to block it. For the next several hours, I would doze off for a while and then wake up again, keeping my gun nearby until the sun rose. After it was light enough, I gathered my belongings and crawled out of the window and went down the fire escape. But when I was about 20 steps away from the house, I turned, and looking back at me from the attic window was the bearded old man. I drew my gun and aimed it at him, but I didn't shoot. I did it as a warning not to follow me. Then I sprinted back into the woods. 2 years later, in the summer of 2013, I returned to the house with 4 of my friends and showed them all the bullet holes in the attic door. I still go camping every now and then, but I always make sure I bring my handgun, because you never know who might be watching you from the shadows.
There's always a reason to be afraid. Number 1.
When I was about 13, my parents and I moved to an old house. It was at least 90 years old. It was large and was in pretty good condition for a house that old. I was an only child, and I got the second biggest room on the second floor, and that room was huge. Sometimes my parents would leave me at home by myself for a few hours if they were going shopping or on a date. I didn't mind staying at home because I like to think of myself as responsible and trustworthy. It made me feel special. One night at around 6 p.m., my parents had gone to run some errands. They were the kind of people who spent hours out shopping for the best deals. They used a lot of coupons on whatever they could, and I did not want to be involved in this at all, so I decided not to go with them. I stayed in my room to watch some TV.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Shut the fuck
What are you doing?
Shut the fuck up!
What are you doing? What are you doing, man? What are you doing? Please, no! Please!
The human brain is a Pandora's box we can only begin to understand. However, some people are born with a natural propensity to harm others. Some even take pleasure in it. Odds are you've come across someone like this in your life. Maybe you didn't even know it. Or is there a killer in you? Today I'm joined with Being Scared to bring you 3 allegedly true stories of real killers. If you enjoy his narration, you can check out his channel in the description. And if you have encountered a killer in your life, or have a scary experience of your own you would like to share, well, don't hold back on me. I tell scary stories, and if you have one, I want to know about it. So be sure to send it my way. Let's begin.
Number 1.
I want to start off by saying that this story is 100% true, and that I have linked an article pertaining to the case. Back in 2011, my family and I went to visit a family friend named Mike at his trailer out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. It was during the summer, so the weather was nice and sunny. No snow to speak of. I was around 14 at the time, and I remember being Blair, who was a little older than my siblings and I, maybe in his early 20s. He seemed decent, though back then I remember thinking that I wouldn't get to hang out with him if not for my brother and sister being there with me. We all hopped on our ATVs and drove out to explore the land, weaving through the forest and out onto a dirt path. Blair took us to a small ice cream shop nearby and bought us all milkshakes. After this, I started to relax around him. The day ended with us returning to Mike's trailer and roasting dinner over the campfire. Everything was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed the trip. We went home later that night. Then a few weeks later we saw Mike on the news. Blair had killed him and stuffed his body under the trailer. It was reported that Mike had been stabbed several times in the chest, and that Blair took a picture of his dead father and sent it to a family member, who then contacted the police. When my father told me about what happened, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Blair was a murderer. I couldn't believe that my siblings and I spent an entire day with a soon-to-be killer, laughing and enjoying ourselves, not knowing what he was capable of.
Number 2.
This isn't my own encounter, but my mother's experience from when she was around 19 to 21 years old. My mother was almost a victim of a creepy rapist serial killer, Baby Man, who preferably uses axes as his signature weapon. She lived alone in a small unit in Richmond, Melbourne, and worked night shifts at a restaurant. Because she worked nights, she would sleep during the day and wake up around 2 to 3 p.m. She had a friend who visited her place regularly around the time she woke up, and they would eat a meal together and hang out for a couple hours. This was a part of my mom's daily routine. One night, my mom was at the laundromat alone, and she noticed a smallish, young, European or Middle Eastern macho-looking man unloading a washing machine full of baby clothes, like a huge amount of baby clothes. To my mom, the whole scene looked out of place. The guy didn't seem right. His demeanor didn't fit the load of baby clothing he was hauling into his basket. The man looked over at my mom, stared at her, but my mom mentioned that she didn't think much about it at the time. She left shortly after with her load and drove back to her unit. A couple of weeks later, my mom finished her shift at work and drove back to her place, went to bed, woke up the next day in the afternoon, and soon heard a knock at her front door. Assuming it was her friend